category of people, but expands it under relative. Would that be correct?
Yes, relative would include, sort of first-degree relatives, also spouse, as you can see there on page
4.
4, right.
And lastly, I guess the biggest thing, on page 2, when it talks about a local governmental officer, this bill does not just refer to someone who's elected.
That's correct.
So it's pretty broad I know it's defined here, but that can be a pretty broad category of people. Thank you.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Along the lines where Senator Petty was going, so this would include like city or county administrator, is that right?
Yes, anybody basically who would have discretionary approval authority with respect to the major development project, plus any member on the governing body.
And then it would go down to like the Planning Commission also?
Yes, because in lines 14, 15 there, you see any member of an agency of a governmental subdivision that has discretionary approval authority. So that would probably include that.
Tell me if I have this right. So under the current ethics law now, where there's some direct benefit to a council member, they have to file an SSI, but then it's up to them whether they vote or not. Is that a correct restatement of the current ethics law?
Yeah, so current ethics law is sort of focused on making or participating in a contract. So you can't do that. If you have filed a statement of substantial interest, or if you haven't, if you disclose your interest, you can engage in matters dealing with, a business that you might have that substantial interest in, as long as it's not a contract.
Direct contract with the municipal entity,
right?
A rezoning or development of this, unless you're directly involved with a contract with the government, wouldn't be covered under current law.
Yes. So
you could approve. Let me restate. So you could approve. You could have a contract with a third party that benefits from this, and they're working on your land. But if your contract is not with the municipality, it wouldn't fall under the current ethics law.
Yes, if you don't participate or engage in making the contract, then as long as you file that statement of substantial interest, then you're okay.
And then one last, this is just a reference that I can't find. I see we define, you mentioned the renewable energy systems. Is that referenced under the definition of the, what is it, the project, or what are those definitions relating back to?
You'll see that on page 4. The definition for major development project is lines 29 through 33 on page 4, and then that references
the renewable energy system.
Right, renewable energy systems, which then, if you look at the definition of renewable energy system, it references wind energy conversion system or solar energy.
You have a definition for a definition for a definition.
Right.
I understand. Okay. I thought of something like that. Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you. Charles, real quick, we have to fill out, and I'm kind of with what Senator Titus was going with, we have to fill out a substantial interest form as legislators. Do local city council, county commission, do they also have to do that? Is that law?
There is a provision, yes, that they should, and I have that statute up on my computer. I'll have to take a look at it to make sure exactly what it says, but there is a provision in the law. Now, if they don't, it's kind of interesting. If they don't, there's this provision that, well, then they can disclose an interest and they can still, pass on matters involving a business that they might have a substantial interest in. But when I sit down, I'll check that to make sure, but I believe there is a requirement.
we have any other questions? Senator Petty, take a minute.
Thank you. I just want to take a minute to introduce my pages. They're here from Turner Middle School, which is in Wyandotte County, and they're 7th and 8th graders. So just raise your hand when I say your name. I have Gabriel's here, and Sadie, and Chris, and Haley, and Maggie, and Ian. And their teacher is here with them as well. So just wanted them to have the opportunity to see the process that we are involved in with local government. Thanks, you guys, for being here.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm being an old history and government teacher myself. I'm glad to see students in the building. Well, our chairman, she had to step out to speak on another bill. And as you can see, we have a full group of people here. And on the hearing, I guess we'll go for 5 minutes. We have 3 proponents, and we'll take the questions at the end. Then I'm hoping to about 5 after 10, we'll let the opponents get a chance to speak, and we'll hold the questions for them at the end too. So I do appreciate the time, and I'll keep track. And when you got 1 minute left, I hold this up. Okay? We got it down? All right. Senator Mike Thompson, I know who this guy is. He used to be in here before. And welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate you hearing this bill. This is a matter basically of anti-corruption. And there's a reason for everything that we put into this bill, because I've seen it happening all over the state for the past 6 or 7 years when I've been going to various counties where they're facing these type of issues. And while I do reference wind and solar conversion systems in this, it's not confined definitely to that, because what we're seeing is officials at the local level who are engaged in activities that would personally benefit them, and then they are not in statute required to recuse themselves. And this undermines the confidence in the process. You know, if you've got a potential benefit coming to you because you've done something, you should have to step out. I've seen it happen on the Senate floor where senators say, hey, I'm not going to vote on this because I would have a personal benefit in it. And unfortunately, at the county level, I've seen it far too many times where there are people who have, and I've seen it actually directly in my home county, where a commissioner had already agreed to provide construction services to an impending solar facility that had not been approved. And he was advocating directly for the approval of this so that he would benefit directly from this. And it only takes one bad actor. I'm not trying to vilify all county commissioners, all local government people, but it only takes a few who engage in this type of activity, and it undermines the confidence of the community that they're getting a fair shake, particularly when you attend these large hearings and you've got 200-300 people who show up in opposition to one of these big major developments, and yet it's pushed right through because somebody sitting on that board making a decision is part of the process. And so that's why we crafted that. I do have in my written testimony on page 2 a suggestion addition that deals with non-governmental organizations, a potential amendment. You can see that in my testimony because in a lot of cases these NGOs are directly or indirectly receiving and distributing government funds. This should be part of the process as well. It's all anti-corruption, bottom line, and I've seen it too many times across this state. It's affecting a lot of people's individual businesses. It's affecting small communities, and even in Johnson County, we're seeing it, not particularly with the wind and the solar, but on other major developments where people who would benefit indirectly because they are a president of an NGO or a nonprofit organization, but they serve in a particular capacity, would benefit from this. I think this would clean up the state. It would make it in people seeing that, hey, we're trying to do something to make sure that, I don't want to impede progress or economic development at all. But it needs to be done on a level playing field so that everybody's ensured that they are getting a fair shake and it's not corrupt. And with that, thank you, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. We'll take questions afterwards, and I appreciate you being in the time. Next, we have Angela Cushing, and please introduce yourself too before you speak. And the same thing, we'll give you 5 minutes, and good luck.
Hi, thank you all for having me. My name is Angel Cushing. I am a property rights advocate, though I own or have no organization. I got involved in personal property rights when I discovered my county tried to pass zoning regulations that would have banned barbed wire and electric fences in my entire county. In perspective, my county is in the Flint Hills, which is cowboy country. So from there, we got involved with National Heritage Areas and eventually the NIETC corridor. When I say we, I now have friends that also help with this. And the reason I bring up the NIETC corridor, because as we traveled around that area and we gave meetings to people of what this is and what they can do to take control of the situation, I had people, civilians, just average people who live in these communities come up to me and say very threatening things, threatening physical, bodily harm if these projects go through. I expressed that concern to Senator Moran's office. I said, at a minimum, if the NIETC corridor goes through, you're looking at a Bundy or a Waco type situation, at a minimum. So as I travel around these counties, asking them to pass resolutions against encroachment of property rights, what I am discovering is pretty much in every commission, not every, I guess I should say a lot, most, there's always one individual who has skin in the game. And they're so recognizable that I've actually nicknamed them the coach. Is their responsibility is to get that project to go through the commission, and they used copy and paste language that they are being taught by somebody, I have no idea, in order to pitch these ideas to the commission or the zoning board in order to get it through. Now, I don't tell people when I travel. I actually hesitated about doing this testimony because I have so many followers. People don't know that they normally have a coach on these commissions and local bodies. And my fear is what I saw with the public outcry on those NITC corridors will spread to those local officials. So I am here before you knowing that ethics is important and justice is important to you, so that, that you can do something about this situation before it gets escalating. The biggest thing to consider is when you direct, especially land policy, at people who did not want it or need it or ask for it, when you threaten them to take everything from them, eventually they have nothing to lose. So I ask for you to get involved in this. In my testimony that's written, there are specific examples that I discuss in counties. I did not put out any names for those safety concerns that I expressed earlier. However, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I will personally give you the names and the examples of the situations that I saw. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, and thank you for being under the time. Appreciate that. The next we have is Charlotte O'Hare, and I know her. Also, we're in the house together. And again, introduce your, please put your name and also under the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reichman. Yes, we did serve together in the House many years ago. Charlotte O'Hara, I'm former county commissioner in Johnson County, and I live at 15712 Windsor Street in Overland Park. And I am here testifying in favor of this. I am hopeful if this passes that it will bring transparency and, in my opinion, put a stop to the too close of relationship of elected officials to a lot of these developments. Now, in Johnson County, and it's not just wind and solar projects. In 2024, we diverted at the local level $108 million in property taxes in just industrial revenue bonds and tax increment finance districts. You have bankers that benefit from this, law firms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just the good old boys in Johnson County, and I've watched this for 40 years. And it's just the way we do business. $108 million in 2024, and that is not sales tax exemptions. That's not star bonds. That's just industrial revenue bonds and tax increment finance districts. So serving on the board, I wanted to just read what I have personally witnessed, and I was on the county commission for 4 years. The county manager and county assistant manager was on the board and an advisory board of the United Community Services, and this NGO receives annual grants from the county. This was not revealed to the Board of County Commissioners. It was only revealed publicly after I asked the question, because I had done some research and I saw that. You know, that's a little too close for comfort. It's just that the NGO and the county manager and assistant county managers have direct connections with this NGO, and nothing happened. In November of 2024, Chairman Kelly voted for an executive session on a transit issue. But when we returned, he announced he would be abstaining from the vote on tabling the $26 million contract with WHC Worldwide. When I asked the reason, he declined to respond, and our chief legal counsel supported his silence. When the contract was brought back for a vote in December 2024, he again abstained from the vote with no explanation. 3, a contract for the vacant Antioch Library building at Shawnee Mission Parkway in Antioch was accepted for $3.9 million, despite the 4 parcels being appraised at over $6 million. This action was fast-tracked by the county manager's office and Chairman Kelly. Myself and Commissioner Ashcraft questioned this 2/3 value contract, but we were ignored and it passed 5-2. KC 2026, World Cup coming into the Kansas City area. They were given a grant of $1.5 million from Johnson County, and the chairman voted, obviously in favor, even though he is a member at large. He is a member at large board member. Chairman Kelly is a partner of Hush Blackwell, a large real estate firm which specializes in tax incentives and land use, along with many other areas of expertise. BOCC Chief Legal Counsel on many occasions assured me that Chairman Kelly is siloed, needs not to recuse himself, even should his firm be involved. Chairman Kelly was the founder and head of Climate Action KC, yet he does not recuse himself from voting on green energy agenda items, such as the notorious Biden EV charging stations, which some are to be built in Johnson County. And he voted in favor of that and did not recuse himself because of his past affiliation with Climate Action KC. So I will stand for questions, but it is a problem. This is a problem. You can't hide from it. We just need to tighten it up, and hopefully this will help, and hopefully this will give people confidence that the process isn't so skewed to those well-connected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anyone have any questions, we'll go to about 5 after to give the opponents a chance. Does anyone have any questions for any one of the 3 proponents? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Senator Thompson, I just wanted to ask about the amendment with the idea of the NGO. So in your mind, like, so say my wife is a member of the local Chamber of Commerce, and they just generally, there's not necessarily a personal interest, but the chamber decides to advocate, we think this is good for business in the county. Would I then, if I'm on city commission, would I then be precluded from voting because she happens to be in leadership at the local chamber?
I think that's one of these situations where it depends whether or not you would personally benefit in a pecuniary nature. If it's one thing to advocate for something, but when you actually are going to be in a position of making a decision on a project or something where, say, your wife, in this case, in the chamber, that's kind of a loose situation. And, we tried to build into this bill a lot of these different things. I know it's very, very difficult to do. But it's just the appearance of corruption is really undermining a lot of trust in the public institutions when they're making these decisions. And that's why we built it in. The other thing is partially a protection that I failed to mention in my original testimony. For counties, because in a lot of cases, what's happening, particularly with these large industrial scale facilities, they're going out and signing leases prior to them being approved. And then the landowners will come and say, hey, I have a private right to do what with my private property, what I can do. But it's prior to the approval. And so they're using that as a cudgel against the county. So the county would have to defend a lawsuit that, hey, we're denying somebody their personal property rights. And that's how it's being utilized as a weapon. So this would hopefully force those people to recuse themselves, also put the county in position to rescind that contract if somebody did not. And so it's kind of a protection clause for the county attorneys who don't have the money, don't have the time or the staff to fight these type situations, but they're going up against big companies who have $1,000 an hour lawyers who are coming into the county and threatening lawsuits. So it's partially a protection for the county in a lot of ways. And we're trying to just consider all the different potential. Commissioner O'Hara brought out Climate Action KC. They get money through the Mid-America Regional Council, $100,000, and yet they are out there advocating for stuff that they will benefit from. And so we're trying to figure out how do we corral these situations? How do we make it more transparent and so that people can push back?
I appreciate the intent of the bill, but I would ask also, so there are several unzoned counties in Kansas.
A lot of them.
There are, I know some counties that they wouldn't make you change your agricultural zoning in order to put solar on or something like that. So this bill would, since there would be no government action, this would I don't know, I'm just asking, is that something you thought about? Is that the intent to exclude those, or?
No. What happens in a lot of these counties, there's approval for a conditional use permit for these type situations. And so, whether or not that county commissioner decided to, approve a conditional use permit so that they could take advantage of a lease. And a lot of times these leases are granted to them and through third parties, through a back door, through a spouse, through a family member, so that they can hide their involvement. And I've seen this. This is why I crafted this bill. I've seen it happen too often for the last 6 or 7 years. And, these counties are being overrun. And all I want is some transparency, some fairness in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we got a couple more minutes. Senator Costico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is actually for the lady, Commissioner O'Hara. As you come, so in Section 1, this new provision of law that prohibits any local government officer who has a substantial interest in a major development project from acting on any matter or participating in a contract. So even if they were to recuse themselves, how would you really prevent them from benefiting from it if other entities that they are working with, I mean, how would you
Well,
actually?
at least if they recuse themselves, they are admitting that they do have connections with the development. And it's for transparency for the public. I'm sure that you're all very aware as to these huge corporations, and they have so much money and they have so much power. And just the regular folks, their voice is being drowned out. And this is just one step in the process to help increase the transparency and help the individual that isn't involved on a regular basis, that when they come to a commission meeting, that they see someone up there and they go, oh my gosh, we know that they're connected with this, and yet they're sitting there, they're discussing it, and they're voting on it. So it's trying to establish a confidence in the local government that it's fair and that there's equal protection under the law. Because in my opinion right now, we're just at least skating on that edge of not having equal protection.
Any other committee questions? All right, well, thank you, everyone. I had to pop up to tax for another issue from my district, so I'm sure the committee and our vice chair ran that portion really well, and we're right on time. So I'd like to draw your attention to the proponents written only. And we don't have, do we have Diana in the audience? Okay, we put her at the top of the list just in case she could get here. And so now we'll move into the opponents, and we have Jay Hall, Deputy Director and General Counsel, Kansas Association of Counties. And there again, Jay, about 5 minutes each, so we have time for questions for you. So thank you, Jay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Jay Hall, the Deputy Director and General Counsel for the Kansas Association of Counties. First thing I wanted to point out, I know there was a question earlier about whether or not local government officials are required to fill out the substantial interest form. The statute I cite at the very beginning of my testimony does in fact require that, so I wanted to just clarify that here up front. Now I want to talk about the bill itself and why we are opposing this bill. First off, this bill is overly broad. It captures every type of project that would be over $250,000. And in our smaller counties in particular, it will be very, very difficult for somebody to not have some interest in those areas, because not only are our county commissioners and our other county staff involved in their community, but they also sit on various boards and things like that, that this bill, particularly with the proposed language for the NGOs, would restrict them from being able to vote on any of those projects. A lot of times our county commissioners sit on these community boards because they have a seat on those boards as a part of being a commissioner. And so it would make it very difficult for them to then vote on things that are occurring in their community because of the fact that they sit on those boards. I'd also point out that there was an interesting conversation as I thought about this bill last week on the Senate floor, actually, about an amendment that would have required senators to abstain in certain situations. And I found that conversation very interesting on that amendment because that amendment actually failed, and it failed in large part because there was concern that you as senators wouldn't be able to represent your districts if you were required to abstain in those situations. Now, obviously, there are situations where somebody has too close of an interest and that interest should be disclosed, and I think it's important for our county officials to also make sure that they are disclosing those things, but I did find that conversation very interesting. Last thing I'll close with is the definition of intimate partner. And this one is kind of interesting to me because last week I had the privilege of seeing one of my old roommates from when I was in law school, and we got to talking about this particular bill, and I told him that under the definition of this bill, we were actually intimate partners because we lived together for 2 years, and so anything that, if he ever had any sort of financial interest and I decided to go to the other side of the table and become a county commissioner, that anything that he had an interest in, because he was an intimate partner of mine, I'd have to find out about that and disclose that on my substantial interest form. With that, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Jay. We'll hop down our list and come back to you. I do have a question for you at that time. So next we have Joshua Swati on behalf of the Kansas Advanced Power Alliance. Good morning, Josh.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to be here in front of you today. I'm here to represent the Advanced Power Alliance. We are the association of all of the developers, engineers, financiers, and builders of the advanced clean energy economy in the state of Kansas. Joining me today also in the audience are several members of the lobbying corps that also participate in this for individual companies. They are good friends of mine. They're partners. Let me underscore, they are not intimate partners, just partners in the Advanced Power Alliance as well. We have a number of issues with this. As we said a few years ago when this committee took up this issue, we don't like to wade into conflict of interest issues on local government matters, but this bill definitely directly addresses our industry, and so we felt it necessary then. We do appreciate the fact that the author of the bill did make an effort to scale down the previous iteration of this, but before I go any further with my testimony, I would say if the committee does feel like something needs to be done, Senator McGinn, I believe last year even, had a piece of legislation that would have expanded the statement of substantial interests. We would recommend that that's a much better way of getting at this than the bill that you have in front of you. Also, before I go any further, he was not able to join us today, but I believe Alan Anderson's written testimony is in front of you. I would direct all of you to that for a couple of reasons. He demonstrates, one, the expansive nature of that definition of intimate partner and what it would require people to do to be able to look at everything. And then two, asks the very poignant question of, why are we addressing just these major development projects when we are not expanding the definition of substantial interests and conflicts of substantial interests to all of the county monies that are spent, which is a very legitimate question if this committee were actually going to look at it. But finally, in my remaining time, I just want to make sure we point out a couple of things. Point number two I've addressed in my own testimony on intimate partner. Point number three on my testimony, I want to make sure you understand that there is a provision to handle these difficult questions that come up. Those are government ethics opinions, and that status is alive and well. There are 45 opinions that have been issued on Kansas Statute 75-4301A alone. So if people have a situation where they feel like, hey, this might run afoul of government ethics laws, they can request an opinion, and they do so all the time. And then finally, I come back to my number one, which is that this bill is only addressing instances where an elected official or a member of that county government does something in support of a project. I would actually posit to you that those sorts of conflicts go both ways. And in fact, in some cases, go both ways to an even greater benefit to someone stopping a project. And I'll list two instances. One, solar tends to be around more populated areas, and those have more development pressure in general. And so there may be developers that have been eyeing a particular piece of property for years, and that private landowner exercising their private rights does not want to give that property up. And so they would love to enroll it in a solar farm because it gives them income and allows them to hold on to it as a family for a long time. But that developer would say, well, I would love to have that project stopped because that would give me an opportunity to get a hold of that property and put a shopping mall or housing or whatever would be on there. And so there is just as much an economic incentive to stop a project that can be as nefarious as you heard before as there is to support a project moving forward. And this piece of legislation only addresses moving them forward. And then finally, committee, I would say, as an editorial note, I think it's safe to say I've actually attended more of these county hearings across the state of Kansas than probably anyone in this room, and there's only a few people in the state that have attended more than I have at all. And I will say that I have noticed a change probably in the last 3 to 4 or maybe 5 years in the type of meetings that are conducted at the county level, and I would note that the change is this. Opposition members, and it's fine to have opposition to any project, a housing project, a wind project, a solar project. Opposition members do come to these meetings, and they do raise their concerns. But what's changed is before, when a county commission would make a decision, they would definitely be disappointed. They were raising their voices and wanted them to vote no, but they would be disappointed, and they would maybe say, all right, well, I guess that's the way it goes. Now, and this is across the state, I see this every time I go into a community that has an opposition group. Instead of saying, well, I guess they just felt differently than we did, they say there must be a conspiracy here. There must be some reason, some secret reason why they made this decision, rather than simply saying, well, I guess they came to a different conclusion than we did. And so I think you actually heard that loud and clear in the proponent testimony, but I would suggest that Senate Bill 66 is definitely not the way to address any of these questions. And from a statement of substantial interest idea, I would recommend looking at what Senator McGinn suggested last year. And I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Josh. And our last opponent conferee is Spencer Duncan, Government Affairs Director, the League of Kansas Municipalities. Good morning, Spencer.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. First, I'm going to give you sort of an overview of some of our concerns, and I'm going to give you an alternative path. I'll just kind of go through them, bits and pieces. New Section 1 uses the language participated in the making of a contract. We're not sure if that means that you can't even be a part of the discussion, or you literally have to absolve yourself of the entire discussion, or if it just does relate to a vote. So some kind of clarification there would be nice to ensure that we can't even speak about it during meetings. There's two different definitions of local government officer. One of them includes elected individuals specifically. The other is that broader example that brings in more individuals. I'm not sure why there's two competing definitions. We probably need to get one definition of what a local officer is. Substantial interest, to the senator's question, it's $2,000 or more. So if someone did work for a Chamber of Commerce, I would think that would exclude them unless they're the lowest paid member of a Chamber of Commerce across the state. Don't make more than $2,000. But I want to give you a couple scenarios that concern us under this bill. So for example, I'll give you one. As you know, I'm on the City Council in Topeka. We have a Chick-fil-A out on Wanamaker. We have a new development on Topeka Boulevard that has a Chick-fil-A, a Whataburger that's being built, and a little strip center. That was a fairly major economic development project. They wanted some incentives. I actually voted against one of those incentives. If I had a child who worked part-time at the Chick-fil-A on Wanamaker, I would not be allowed to participate at all in this conversation for this multi-million-dollar project on Topeka Boulevard. I don't believe that's the intent, but that's definitely what the bill does as it is written. And so that's one example. Including ex-spouses is a little odd. Historically, Kansas has been very clear in much of our law that an ex is an ex, that legally you are separated and done and not connected to the other individual anymore. And much of the law we've written makes that distinction. This undoes a little bit of that. It draws a direct connection between you and an ex-spouse and says, even though you're exes, you now are still, we're determining you're connected even if you haven't talked to each other in many years. The cohabitation piece, it's been touched on a bit, but I want to give some broader examples. We have instances, particularly in Kansas, where a tornado goes through the town and individuals end up living with other people for a while from a disaster. They've now cohabitated with those individuals, right? Fraternities, sororities that you may have lived in at a time. All of that would be brought into this cohabitation piece. And so again, that makes that very broad. It also makes it broad to the point where at times, I may not remember who all I cohabitated with, right? In college or through the years, or I can't go through a list. I'm 49. I can't remember every single person maybe who came through my house at one point in time. So we have issues with that definition. There are steps you can take, though, to address the concerns you have heard. First of all, I agree with Josh. Go back and look at Senator McGinn's bill, and it's a good starting point. Right now, those substantial interest forms, we're only required to fill them out when there's a change. Fix that. Make us do it every year. That way, we can't claim we forgot about something and we filled it out 2 years ago, right? Up the penalties. If we don't do it or we don't include something on those, I am not going to sit here and defend people who aren't being transparent in our cities. You can look at the penalties for those. You should also require that either the Elections Commission or the local elections office post these online. Right now, they get filed. You have to go do a CORA request. Make it simple. Make them required to be posted so that everybody, while they're sitting in that meeting, listening to the city council, the county commission, can click it and see what are their substantial interests, and I can know right this second. The other thing is, you hear me say this often, if it's a concern at the local level. We are all government together. It should, of course, be a concern up here. And as usual, this bill only goes after local governments. It does not include you, the state legislature. And so we always argue at the league, please do, if you're going to do it unto us, also do it unto yourself as you make these policies, right? Let's treat each other equally. So there is a path that I think addresses these issues that's not as broad as this and will be a great step in the right direction. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Spencer. Do you have questions for Spencer since he's standing right now?
Real quick.
Help me remember, and I'm terribly sorry if this was talked about before I came back in. We fill out a substantial interest form every year as legislators. Do city mayors, do city council fill out
So
substantial?
under the current law, we have to fill it out.
One time.
Well, every time, so the first time you get elected, let's say you fill it out. Then you're only required to fill it out if there's a change. But we have actually always advocated that, because we recognize people forget. If you're in office for 4 years, you may have just forgotten. Now, the city attorneys will try to do a good job, and the City Attorneys Association sends out a reminder every year. You might want to remind your people, fill this out in case there's a change, but we've always advocated, just require that every, whoops, that's my alarm for 5:05. That, you know, January 1 or whatever random date you want to pick, it's required to be filled out.
Senator Petty.
I certainly appreciate your reference and the past testimony as well about intimate partner, because I thought there's a lot of broad things in this bill, but the intimate partner one was interesting, but I actually hadn't thought about college roommates. And it's like college roommates, like, oh my gosh, that would be a long way back that you'd have to be thinking about what are they doing or what did they do or if they're doing now. Yeah, so I appreciate that.
Senator Blue.
Thank you. Spencer, this kind of made me think of your analogy and what you're talking about with, not necessarily intimate partner,
No.
but in this bill, so for instance, in these smaller communities, everyone's related to everybody. So like, for instance, my sister-in-law is the economic development director. In this bill, would that be a conflict of interest?
I read it as so because in part it specifically says anyone who's making, I think they do a threshold of $2,000 or more that's reportable income. So, and I think I don't know the answer, but I think if someone got upset and took it to court, I always think of what's a court going to say, and they're always going to look at the broadest interpretation of the law. Now, I think, and I can't remember if McGinn's old bill did this, I think we'd also argue right now on those substantial interest forms, I only have to list my spouse or significant other. I don't think we would oppose be sitting down and saying, maybe you want to expand that. Maybe it should include your children or even your siblings, right? That's okay. And then at least people would know, okay, we've at least said your immediate type family is on this form. So again, it's disclosed and people could look at it. So I don't even think we're opposed to some expansion of that, what has to be on that form, which would, again, help address some of these concerns.
Thank you.
Spencer, Carolyn had a bill number last year. Can you?
We'll dig it up. Yeah, we've got it somewhere.
Oh, look, our research has it. How lovely. So what number is that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That is 2024 Senate Bill 301.
Because we did have a good conversation about that, and we were probably on the right path. We just didn't have time to finish that. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you send that out, the PDF of that to the committee? Can you get it? And then for Spencer, do you have any objection? So I think part of the intent of this bill is to broaden this to cover people that may own a property interest that sort of indirectly benefit when they advocate for this. Is expanding the conflict of interest law in that way objectionable, or is it just done? Is it a matter of doing it in the right way?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, that's obviously always the rub. I will say this, assuming that property, I guess if it's just personal property you own, you don't have to, if it's business property, an LLC would supposed to be on that substantial interest form. So if you put it in some kind of LLC or even a trust, it would be on there. But to your point, if I just owned the property and it was in my name, yeah, I mean, I think it'd be fine to identify, because again, that's all public record, right? I can look, so I don't see any reason saying something that's already public record, we just want you to also put on this other document.
Senator Petty.
I know we keep going back to this conversation about substantial interest form, and and I have filled that out as a as a commissioner, and I have filled it out as a legislator. But just remind me, on that form, I only have to refer to myself and my spouse.
Correct. That's, yeah, and which was my point. If we wanted to expand that to include some more immediate family, like I said, children, siblings, you know, I don't think there's much, I haven't heard much objection from my cities on that front.
Under the definition here, that means relative, means with respect to
Under this definition, yeah.
any spouse, former spouse, is there too, parent, child, or sibling. I mean, I guess we get into a lot of personal details here, but, you know, people who do have former spouses that they may not have never even had any contact with for decades. You might have to find them. It's like that roommate.
Wait until I was 40.
It's like that
married,
roommate.
So I don't have any former spouses. I don't know.
That roommate that you like.
That's right. I had some shady roommates. I'm not going to lie.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. And
you.
Jay, I just did have a quick question with county commissioners. The same way they fill out the substantial interest one time?
Yes, Jay Hall, Deputy Director General Counsel for KAC. They are required to fill it out once, and then if there are changes, I always encourage our commissioners, in the name of transparency, to also, if they are dealing with a matter in which they do have a substantial interest, just in case people haven't looked at their form, to go ahead and disclose that in the open meeting. They can choose whether or not they want to abstain from that, but they at least disclose it so that everybody knows what that interest is as they're talking about that particular topic.
And with your local county governments, in my district, I would see some different developments. Do you see, other than our suggestions that we have modifying that report, are there other ideas that you might have that gets to the idea of what this bill is, that we can use it somehow, but not so extensive?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is I would not require that they abstain from voting on those things because, again, particularly in some of our smaller counties, a lot of our county commissioners sit on other community boards, whether it's the economic development or the hospital board or the museum board or whatever it is. And so they would be prevented from voting on anything that had to do with any of those boards in these smaller communities. And that becomes very unworkable very quickly.
Senator Petty.
I'll just follow up on that. I would totally agree. And it's not just smaller communities, it's any community. I mean, you know, if you're in leadership, you're often asked to be involved in a lot of different things. And for a lot of reasons, because you're knowledge based. And so that would say, hey, you can't be anything but an elected official. And that really precludes the use of that broader base of knowledge that's involved there.
All right, well, thank you, Jay. I wanted to point out to the committee's attention, opponent written only, Amanda Stanley, City of Topeka. We have neutral city attorney, City of Overland Park. And at that point, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 66. Oh, I'm Charles. I'm sorry, Charles, you hop in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up with Senator Blue's question. So the statute is 754302A, if you want to look that up, pertaining to when folks need to file the form now. It applies to candidates for local office, appointees, like if there's a vacancy for local office, and then as the conferees have indicated, if there's holders of local office, if there's a change.
I do want to mention, too, on the opponent side, I didn't mention Alan Klaus Anderson, who wasn't here today, but he also has written opposition in our folder, too, as well. So with that, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 66. And thank you to my vice chair for taking over there in the beginning while I ran upstairs to some local folks from home. And thank you very much, committee, and we're adjourned.